The full House of Representatives has voted to hold Mark Meadows in criminal contempt of Congress. Former President Trump's White House chief of staff failed to comply with a subpoena from the Select Committee investigating the January 6th assault. It's now up to the Justice Department to pursue those charges. CBS News congressional reporter Zak Hudak joins me now with more from Capitol Hill. Hi there, Zak. So now that the House has voted, what happens next?
Elaine, the next step would be for the recommendation to be delivered to the Justice Department physically, for them to receive this recommendation from the House that Mark Meadows be prosecuted. And then after that, the Justice Department would have a grand jury decide whether or not to indict him. Going forward from there, we can look at a pretty slow timeline. In the case of Steve Bannon, who the House found in contempt of Congress earlier this year, his first hearing is not scheduled until the middle of the summer. So for Meadows, we could expect it to be even later in the year. So it's a pretty slow, drawn-out process, while on the congressional side, the process of holding him in contempt has really only taken 2 days. The committee yesterday advancing the measure, and then today the entire House voting to pass it.
Well, as you say, it is a very long process ahead. What are the penalties, though, if the Justice Department does decide to prosecute and Meadows is found guilty?
The penalty would be up to a year in jail, which is a very real possibility. But Elaine, I do want to point out that the case of Meadows is not exactly the same as that with Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon did not cooperate at all with the committee. He, from the very beginning, said he was invoking his Fifth Amendment right to not speak. It's like when you watch the show Cops and they read you the Fifth Amendment. He said he was invoking that. So it's very clear in that indictment that he didn't cooperate from day one. Excuse me. For Mark Meadows, on the other hand, he did give quite a bit to the committee that we've seen over these last couple days, including a number of text messages that were sent to him from members of Congress, from conservative media personalities, from Donald Trump's own son on the 6th and leading up to the 6th that paint a much broader picture. But the point is, before Mark Meadows pulled out of cooperating, he did cooperate to some extent. So that changes the calculus a little bit for the Justice Department. And then the other point I would make is that, unlike Steve Bannon, Meadows at the time of January 6th was the Trump White House chief of staff. He was a former White House senior aide, and there are other questions about forcing someone that close to the president to reveal his private conversations with the president. So there's a lot of factors that make it a little bit more difficult to successfully prosecute Mark Meadows than to prosecute someone like Steve Bannon.
Right, clearly two very different cases. Well, is the panel looking to speak to anyone else connected to former President Trump in its investigation?
Elaine, they are. This week alone, they are hoping to speak with Stephen Miller, former senior White House advisor. And they've already been reaching out to people like Nick Luna, who was the former president's personal assistant. So they're looking at people who were in direct contact with the president, that were in the room with him as he was contemplating how to handle these different things. But they're also reaching out to people who are sort of adjacently involved with the president or just supporters of his who sort of got these ideas out there, these falsehoods about fraud in the election that helped incite things. An example of that would be Alex Jones, who the committee has a deposition scheduled with on Saturday this week.
Much more to come. All right, Zak Hudak on Capitol Hill for us. Zak, thanks as always.
Thank you, Elaine.